Journeying in the jungle of life, we often stop at roadside inns in order to set out afresh after a night's lodging and meal. What makes us passers-by in the cycle of life, from birth to birth, unable to dwell calmly anywhere? In the rays of Dharma sunlight, one can perceive the dancing dust in the air. The guest dust of afflictions rises and sinks incessantly, agitated and restless. The mind's wonderful bright true nature is like the empty space, not to be destroyed, but luminous and motionless. The ancient Wenshui pagoda is riddled with bullet holes fired during the Japanese invasion. The pagoda reflects the vicissitudes of passing years and symbolizes the perpetuation of Buddha's Dharma. The massive and dense smoke of evil deeds filled up the clear, azure mind sky. The gas dust of afflictions thickens and clots together, producing knowledge, sensation, thought, and action. The more we dwell on it, the heavier and thicker the mind's dust. We should detach from it constantly, in every minute, every second, and every thought. The wandering Dhutanga monks do not dwell long or linger at any place. When there is no impediment, it will, in the lapse of time, produce a true mind, which does not rely on anything. Usually, after walking 20 kilometers, a suitable place for spending the night will appear. Therefore, the daily distance traveled by the monks is approximately 20 kilometers. The abbot would then select an appropriate site for lodging. In the Dhutanga practices, there are 4 categories related to lodging: dwelling in the arena, dwelling in a graveyard, dwelling under a tree, dwelling in the open air. There is also one vigorous Dhutanga, which is the practice of sitting without lying down. The path of purification also lists any bed uses practice as a type of lodging. The word aranya is Sanskrit, meaning a quiet place, a leisure and tranquil place, an uninhibited clean place, and a place of no discord. Staying in aranya can produce countless merits and is praised by Buddhas in 10 directions. When the world-honored one first turned the Dharma wheel for the sake of the 5 bhikkhus, the 5 bhikkhus asked, "What types of lodging and bedding should we use?" The Buddha replied, "You may dwell in aranya, under a tree, in abandoned empty houses, valleys, caves, in the open air, on grassland, in the forest, in the graveyard, or by the waterside, to lay out grasses and leaves as you are bedding." Monks live in aranya where it is far away from human habitation. An aranya is a remote place where it is at least 2 miles apart from any village. The path of purification says, starting from the boundary of a village, an aranya must have a distance of at least 3,000 feet. Boundary is defined as one krosa. During the Qing dynasty, 1 krosa equal to 5 lis, the equivalent of approximately 2 kilometers in today's measurements. The 4 divisions of Vinaya defines 1 krosa as the distance traveled by 1 drum beat. Due to differences in size and material, the range of sound varies. However, even the best drum could reach no more than 2 kilometers. Thus, a quiet site removed from any village and cannot be reached by the sound of drums may be called an aranya. Its distance from human habitation should be over 2 kilometers. The Buddha often praised the benefits of living in aranya. Some Vinaya rules were formulated accordingly for bhikkhus who dwelt in aranyas. For instance, the precepts only allow bhikkhus to enter villages for alms collection prior to noon. After midday, if matters are not related to the Dharma or in reason of illness, one can no longer enter villages. However, if monks happen to walk through a village during wandering after a high noon time, it is allowable since they have no intention to dwell by the place and are just passing. It is also permitted to stay near a village for the night and depart the next morning. Villages abound with secular impurities, thus not suitable for monks to dwell. Monks should cultivate at a place away from any settlements, thus free from defilements, pure and clean, cultivate the path with virtue and lofty qualities. They would dwell happily in the mountains and forests, but not among men, speaking with none and with downcast eyes. Whether sitting, rising or walking, their mind is focused on the Dharma. Often they would travel far and wide to distant countries to disseminate their teachings. During the time of the Buddha, some bhikkhus dwelt alone in Aranya, avoiding contact with the world. Weary of the 5 desires, they pursued renunciation single-mindedly and transformed living beings by the merit and virtue they cultivated. Some bhikkhus lived as a community in sublime abodes, educating and instructing the mass. During spring and autumn, they would roam around to spread the words of the Buddha. When Buddhism reached China, the worthy masters and eminent monks also chose to build monasteries in quiet and secluded places to benefit cultivation. The word aranya has since become a synonymous name for monastery. When bhikkhus dwell among the crowd, even if they practice diligently, all the Buddhas would become concerned and worried. When bhikkhus dwell in the mountains and woods, even if they just lie down in repose, all the Buddhas would be glad. The Buddha was born under the sal tree, attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, turned the wheel of Dharma under the auspicious tree, and entered Nirvana under the Sala trees. The birth, enlightenment, preaching, and passing of the Buddha were all under trees. Sitting under a tree entails great Dharma benefits. Not only Sakyamuni Buddha, but also all the Buddhas had attained enlightenment by sitting under a tree. Sitting under a tree is one of the original 4 requisites established by the Buddha. Witnessing leaves changing colors and falling on the ground reminds one of impermanence. The 4 requisites that can foster the ideal personality of a sage and are capable of leading the path to the attainment of holy fruits and to liberation. From years of wandering experiences, they know that if they enter secular households to seek out shelter, field, or haystacks, they may fail to succeed. Once they stop from seeking external conditions and continue to walk forward, a better suited place for lodging will likely appear. Therefore, even in rain, they do not seek shelters from residential houses, factories, mines, or any other covered structures, not even eaves, to cut off the mind from seeking and longing. Bridge openings may be used to shelter from the rain. If there were no bridges, a tree would be a good shield. Plastic bags may be used for sleeping during the rain. After arriving in the woods, monks begin to unfold their plastic bags and put in their string beds and sleeping bags to lie in. In this way, even during a heavy downpour, as long as water does not accumulate around the spot, they could still have a sound rest in the plastic bag. Use small plastic bags to protect their backpacks from being drenched and place them by the tree. Plastic bag keeps one from the wind and the rain and is warm inside.
外面那个山木里头渗雨，这家关，没它还不能那么关。它能打出渗出，它能渗出去，这头底下都飘起来。你看这以后再不带山木了。帐篷接缝都不进。帐篷一小雨去，大雨了它就往里渗，顺那个针眼的缝里，整就往里进。那有一个那特别急，出去还出去。一个是这个能解决一点问题。 就是把它包着，把那口一卡住，完回来，你愿意怎么浇怎么浇，我就不管了。上面下边都没事。上面我把上面口卡住，搁上面就能喘气就完事儿。
No one knows where to ask for alms and to eat when wandering, nor does one know where to take lodging. To seek no comfort, there is no comfort to be lost. The fallen yellow leaves send forth a good amount of heat. Packing them into a thick bag and resting on them keeps one warm. This is another discovery of the northern Tutanga wanderers. The Buddha speaks, the 42 section says, those who accept the Dharma of the way should renounce all worldly possessions, accept only the right amount of alms food, eat one meal a day at noon, lodge under a tree and desire nothing more. For what makes one foolish and irrational is none other than craving and passion. Sitting cross-legged at all times without lying down is called sitter's practice. Not lying down to rest at night is an especially diligent form of practice. To have no thoughts arise is called sitting. Perceiving the still self-nature is called dhyana. The Buddha sat in meditation under a Bodhi tree and upon seeing a bright star in the sky, attained enlightenment. Sitting and walking meditations, one kinetic and one quiescent, are two cultivating methods taught by the Buddha. Monks meditate 5 times daily. When wandering on the road, they also practice sitting meditation to cultivate the ability to remain in dhyana under all circumstances. Among the 4 awesome deportments, walking, standing, sitting, and lying, sitting is the best. It promotes digestion and helps to regulate breath. Cultivators who are yet to accomplish the way have all kinds of afflictions, which are like prying thieves ready to defeat their targets any time. Walking and standing, on the other hand, are difficult to subdue the mind and cannot be practiced for long. Lying on the bed makes one drowsy and dull. Thus one often practices the method of sitting. Among the different sitting methods, crossing the 2 legs in lotus position is the most stable posture. The Buddhas of the past, present, and future, and all disciples have entered samadhi by sitting in the lotus position. Anyone, whether he is a monk or layman, can practice sitting meditation. Wealth, lust, fame, food, and sleep are the 5 hell routes. Sleep is one of the 5 mental hindrances, and too much of it can obstruct the bright self-nature. The 5 hindrances are avarice, attachment to sense objects; wrath, hatred, and anger; sleep, dullness and stupidity; excitability, restless, wandering anxiety and worry; and doubt, lack of faith in the Dharma, hesitant and skeptical. Each year, during the 7-day cultivation periods, monks recite the precepts or Buddha's name continuously for 14 days without stop. This is an effective way for destroying the 5 hindrances. Prescribed by the Buddha, they rest during the middle period of the night from 10 to 2 o'clock next morning, sleeping for 4 hours. While sleeping, they often sit through the night or lie in the lion's posture, maintaining diligent practice. They often stop their wandering journey to rest before the day darkens and start to walk again around 3 o'clock in the morning. Having walked for some distance, they stop to meditate. This will effectively control the amount of sleep and help to prevent slackness and physical outflow. But if you don't renounce your lustful thoughts, you will not be able to get out of the dust. To renounce lust, one must reduce the hours of sleep. This is because an excess of sleep can destroy the purity of mind and concentration. The Buddha drew up the rule of resting during the middle of the night. The period from falling asleep to awake is the time really needed for a person to rest, and 4 hours are sufficient for the body to recover from fatigue. Initially, one may feel drowsy, but that is due from an old habit, not that the body needs more time to rest. Most dreams occur during the second phase of sleep, which is also easy to cause physical outflows. Because the mind has already become active during this interval, upon waking, one may feel especially fatigued, even more exhausted than during the day. More sleep does not necessarily mean that one will do things well. Rather than roaming around to visit Buddhist masters and studying theories, one should reduce the amount of sleep and eliminate the defilements of the 5 mental hindrances. Wisdom will then slowly emerge from the mind. When one's practice has attained a certain level, his cultivation goal will be reached easily. Thus, reducing sleep is a mean of diligent practice. This is wisdom. If one can sleep properly, it will be easy to maintain mindfulness by day and night. Keep the mind in this state and practice by following the Dharma's path. Elder Badrika was a prince of the Sakya clan. After leaving the household life, he often dwelt alone in wild forest and file, sighing, "Oh joy, joy." The Buddha asked him why he sighed so. He replied, "When I lived at home, I was protected by armed guards everywhere, but I still felt fear. Now living alone in Aranya, in a graveyard or under a tree, perfecting the Dhutanga practices, upholding all the precepts, practicing dhyana and vipassana, and enhancing concentration and wisdom, I have cut off all the outflows and become an arhat. When I think of the happiness of renunciation, thus I sigh, oh joy, joy." The wandering ascetic monks have abandoned their attachment to houses, dwelling wherever they could. By the river, in the valley, or in the open air. Bhikkhus are content to dwell anywhere they could. They do not distinguish between good and bad lodgings and have no thoughts of liking or disliking. They have closed the door of craving and desires and are living the life of modest needs and contentment. Monks dwell in the open country, away from the bustle of the world, lying on grass beddings and a string bed and abiding by the teachings of the Buddha. Thus, happy are the Dhutanga monks who dwell wherever they could. Monks sit in the open air, their mind free of impediment and their body at ease. In the quiet of the night, above is the vast dark black dome with twinkling stars and glistening moon. The Goloton breeze blows in gusts and currents of chill creeps through the flesh. Sometimes water freezes in the bottle and the freezing cold often wakes them at night. When there are no bridges or trees to protect them from the rain, they would have to keep walking with their raincoats on. During periods of wandering, monks usually keep only one set of robe to cultivate the ability so as to avoid seeking from external conditions. In rainy days, they often have to wear wet robes, shoes, and socks. Though conditions differ inside and outside the monastery, the goal is cultivation. For those who cultivate the Bodhisattva's path, practicing the Dhutangas is their duty. The world is fraught with all kinds of suffering, such as cold and heat, which arise due to different karmic visions and experiences of each individual. When the six senses organs indulge in heedlessness, they produce sense experiences of happiness and suffering. Buddha monks dwell in the open air. By subduing their bodies, they cut off passions and free themselves of attachments. Ascetic practices can purify the mind by plucking out desires, making it not to dwell on either pain or pleasure, to attain the principle of the middle way. Buddha's monastic disciples often dwell in the graveyard, an important practice which can lead to the ending of all sufferings of birth, aging, disease, and death. On their way to wandering, a funeral on the roadside tells of life's impermanence. Tombs and corpses on this desolate land remind them not to forget transmigration and mortality. Always be vigilant and cultivate the way diligently. Lodging in the graveyard at night is called charnel ground dwellers practice. Passing burial places while wandering provides the causes and conditions for bhikkhus to dwell in the graveyard. Humans do not think about death, yet we forget that we are inevitably approaching towards it every moment. Those unconscious bodies just a few feet below the yellow earth had all been alive once in the swirling river of life that rushes forward, like you and me. Life exists in the span of a single breath. As soon as the last breath is drawn, all protections are of no use, and one could only abide by the law of death. Now, the only thing that can be done is to burn or bury the body. People fear death, yet they choose to ignore birth and purposely produce all kinds of risings. With production, there is extinction. Human greed has increased the frequency of these illusionary risings, creating false appearances to differences that exist among living beings. Because of disparities in age, health, fame, and wealth, they in turn breed arrogance. These are all inner tombs which accelerate the rounds of birth and deaths. Regardless of age, nationality, and rank, the graveyard is the greatest gathering place for human beings. There is no way to traverse this bitter sea of birth and death except the Buddha and his saintly disciples who have crossed over its ferries. This crossover, penetrating knowledge and grasp of the nature of birth, aging, illness, and death. What is the cause of death? Aging and death are produced by birth, which comes from being, which in turn comes from grasping, craving, feeling, touch, the six sense organs, name and form, consciousness and action. Action arises from ignorance. It is ignorance inherited from beginningless past that has caused aging and death, worries and sadness. Chasing behind these worthless illusions, one will eventually fall into the hole dug by himself and be buried by it. Living by the graves, inside there lays their owners while bhikkhus dwell outside. Such a close distance to the decaying corpses enables bhikkhus to meditate on the nature of existence and to release their grasping attachment to the physical body. When faced with death, even if one does not willingly let go of the material body, at death's door he will have to give it up passively. Only the realized practitioners understand how strong and frightening the subtle changes of attachment are, which can only be dug out and eliminated through the practice of the Dhutangas. Properly reflect on the outer and inner tomes can eliminate craving, arrogance and fear, and extinct the production of thoughts. Then death will extinct. The Buddha enjoined this important Dhutanga practice. No matter how absurd it may seem to the secular eyes, the sages who practice and abide by it have attained great achievement along this path, and through the Dhutanga lineage, it will lead a greater number of living beings onto the Dharma boat that ferry across the bitter sea of life and death.